$50 million. That wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was the exact amount Harrison Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Heavy Industries, stood to lose if his merger failed. He sat in the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, laughing at the idea that anyone outside his boardroom could understand his business, least of all the woman refilling his water glass. He saw a waitress in a cheap uniform. He didn't know he was looking at a former logistics prodigy who had lost everything. When he slapped a $50 million contract on the table and sneered, "If you're so smart, fix it," he didn't realize he had just made the most dangerous bet of his life, and he certainly didn't expect her to win. The scent of truffle oil and aged cognac hung heavy in the air of the Obsidian, Chicago's most exclusive steakhouse. It was the kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than Cassidy Miller's rent for 6 months. Cassidy tightened the apron around her waist, wincing slightly. Her feet were throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache that had become her constant companion over the last 8 months. At 28, Cass had expected to be running supply chain analytics for a Fortune 500 company, not serving medium-rare ribeyes to men who treated her like furniture. But life had a way of shattering expectations. After her mother's cancer diagnosis and the subsequent mountain of medical debt that decimated her savings, Cass had dropped out of her MBA program, left the corporate track, and taken the only job that offered cash tips immediately. "Table 4 needs attention, Cass." "Now," the floor manager, a sweaty man named Arthur, hissed into her ear. "It's the Sterling party. Don't mess this up or you're out." Cass nodded, keeping her eyes down. "Yes, Arthur." She knew exactly who was at table 4. Everyone in the city knew Harrison Sterling. He was the 35-year-old CEO of Sterling Heavy Industries, a man whose face graced the cover of Forbes and Business Insider regularly. He was known for 2 things: his ruthless efficiency in acquiring failing shipping companies and his absolute intolerance for incompetence. Tonight, however, Harrison Sterling looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man watching his empire burn. Cass approached the table with a pitcher of ice water, moving with the practiced silence of someone trying to remain invisible. There were 4 men at the table. Harrison sat at the head, his tie loosened, his dark hair slightly disheveled. To his right was Grant Holloway, his CFO, a man with a nervous tic who kept tapping his pen on the mahogany table. "It doesn't make sense, Harrison," Grant was saying, his voice rising in panic. "The logistics for the Kensington merger are falling apart. The projected EBITDA is down 14% because we can't integrate their trucking routes fast enough. The unions are going to eat us alive. We're going to lose the $50 million incentive package from the investors if we don't present a viable strategy by Friday." Harrison slammed his hand down, causing the silverware to rattle. Cass froze mid-pour, making sure not a drop spilled. "I don't want to hear about the unions, Grant," Harrison growled, his voice a low, dangerous baritone. "I bought Kensington Logistics for their fleet, not their complaints. We cut the redundancy. We slash the middle management. That saves us $12 million right there." "We can't," Grant argued, sweating. "The Red Route, the corridor from Ohio to Pennsylvania, is completely deadlocked. If we cut staff there, the freight stops moving. If the freight stops, the stock tanks. We're bleeding cash, Harrison. Maybe we should back out." Harrison took a swig of his scotch, his eyes cold. "I don't back out. I win. Find me a solution, Grant. I don't care if you have to fire every driver and hire robots. Fix the Red Route, or I find a CFO who can." Cass finished pouring the water. As she turned to leave, her mind automatically began visualizing the map of the Ohio-Pennsylvania corridor. She knew that route. In her previous life, before the tragedy, she had written a thesis on mid-Atlantic freight bottlenecks. "He's looking at the wrong variable," she thought. It's not a headcount issue. It's a scheduling algorithm flaw involving the way stations. She bit her lip. Walk away, Cass. You're a waitress. You need this tip. But the desperation in the room was palpable. Harrison Sterling was staring at a tablet, his finger hovering over a button that would likely authorize a mass layoff of 2,000 workers to save his bottom line. 2,000 families, just like hers, about to be crushed because a billionaire was looking at the wrong spreadsheet. She couldn't help it. The injustice burned in her chest. "It's not the drivers," she said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison Sterling stopped scrolling. He slowly looked up, his blue eyes narrowing as they landed on Cass. Grant Holloway looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Excuse me?" Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet. Cass clutched the water pitcher tighter, her knuckles turning white. "The red route. The bottleneck isn't the drivers or the unions. It's the way station scheduling in Youngstown. Kensington's trucks are hitting the scales during peak steel transport hours. They're sitting idle for 4 hours a day unpaid. That's why your EBITDA is down. You're paying for fuel and time, not movement." Arthur, the manager, practically sprinted over from the kitchen door, his face pale. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry. She's new. I'll have her removed immediately." Harrison held up a hand, silencing Arthur without looking at him. He kept his gaze fixed on Cass. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was the look of a predator who had just found something interesting. "A waitress," Harrison said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Thinks she knows more about global logistics than my entire executive board?" "I'm not just a waitress," Cass said, her voice trembling, but her chin held high. "And I know I'm right." Harrison laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Arthur, don't fire her yet." He turned his body fully toward Cass. "You think you're clever? You think because you read a headline on your phone, you understand my business?" "I understand data," Cass replied. "And I know that firing 2,000 people won't fix a scheduling error. It will just cost you $50 million in severance and lawsuits." Harrison stood up. He was tall, imposing, and radiating power. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document, the strategic plan for the merger. He tossed it onto the table next to the half-eaten steaks. "This company is bleeding out," Harrison said. "My analysts, Ivy League graduates, all of them, have been trying to solve this for 3 weeks. They say we have to cut costs. You say we have to shift schedules." "Yes," Cass said. "Fine." Harrison's eyes glinted with a cruel amusement. "Let's make this interesting. You seem very confident with my money." "Harrison, don't!" Grant warned. Harrison ignored him. "I bet you $50 million. The restaurant went silent. Other diners turned to look. "Excuse me?" Cass breathed. "Not that you have $50 million, Harrison sneered. "But I do. That's the value of the incentive package I lose if this merger fails on Friday. So here is the deal. You come to my office tomorrow at 6 a.m. You have 48 hours to rewrite our strategy for the Kensington merger. If you fix the red route and save the deal, I'll give you a consultant fee of $1 million and a permanent job." Cass's heart hammered against her ribs. $1 million. That would pay for her mother's treatment, pay off the debts, save their house. It was a lifeline. "And if I fail?" she asked. Harrison leaned in close, his cologne smelling of expensive wood and intimidation. "If you fail, or if you waste my time, you sign a non-disclosure agreement that bans you from ever working in any corporate sector again. And you publicly admit on video that you're a fraud. You'll be a waitress for the rest of your life, Cassidy. No second chances." It was a trap. He wanted to humiliate her to prove a point to his board, that the common people didn't understand the complexities of his world. He was betting on her failure. Cass looked at the document on the table. She looked at Arthur, who was glaring at her. Then she thought of her mother sitting in the hospital waiting room, unable to afford the good specialists. She looked Harrison Sterling in the eye. 6 a.m., Cass said. Don't be late, Mr. Sterling. The Sterling Heavy Industries headquarters was a glass monolith that pierced the Chicago skyline, a testament to wealth and unyielding power. At 5:55 a.m., the lobby was already buzzing with security personnel and early bird executives. Cassidy stood outside the revolving doors, taking a deep breath. She had traded her waitress uniform for her only remaining business suit, a navy blue ensemble from her grad school days that was slightly tight around the shoulders but still looked sharp. She had spent the entire night awake, researching everything publicly available about the Kensington merger. She swiped the guest pass the security guard had reluctantly handed her and stepped into the elevator. The ride to the 40th floor felt like an ascent to an execution. When the doors opened, she wasn't greeted by a receptionist. She was greeted by chaos. The entire floor was an open-plan war room. Analysts were shouting into headsets. Massive screens displayed live shipping maps of the globe, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. You must be the charity case. Cass turned to see a woman with severe blonde hair and a suit that cost more than a car. She held a tablet like a weapon. I'm Victoria, VP of Operations. Harrison told us you were coming. He also told us to give you a desk in the corner and not to help you. I don't need help, Cass said, masking her intimidation. I need access to the Kensington raw data files, the manifests, the driver logs, and the way station timestamps for the last 6 months. Victoria laughed dryly. Access is granted, but don't expect the data to be clean. Terminal 4 is yours. She pointed to a solitary desk pushed against a wall, far away from the main action. Clock starts now. You have until the board meeting on Friday morning. That's 47 hours and, she checked her watch, 50 minutes. Cass sat at the desk. It was an older computer, clearly a spare. As she logged in, she felt eyes on her. The other analysts, men in crisp shirts and women in tailored dresses, were whispering and snickering. They knew about the bet. To them she was a joke, a waitress playing pretend. Focus, Cass, she told herself. Ignore them. Look at the numbers. She opened the files. It was a disaster. The data was fragmented. Kensington Logistics hadn't been digitalizing their logs correctly. It was millions of rows of disorganized chaos. For the first 6 hours, Cass didn't move. She didn't drink water. She didn't blink. She wrote a Python script to scrape the messy data and organize it into a readable format. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The muscle memory of her past life came flooding back. She wasn't Cass, the waitress here. She was Cass, the analyst. By noon, she found the first smoking gun. She had been right about the way stations, but it was worse than she thought. It wasn't just Youngstown. The entire fleet was being routed through secondary highways to avoid tolls, but the fuel cost of the stop-and-go traffic on those back roads was triple the cost of the tolls. Idiot, she muttered under her breath. Who set up this routing? I did. Cass spun around. Grant Holloway, the nervous CFO, was standing behind her, holding a cup of coffee. He didn't look nervous now. He looked defensive. You routed the fleet to avoid tolls? Cass asked, incredulous. Grant, you're saving $200 per truck on tolls, but losing $600 in fuel and 3 hours in labor. That's a net loss of $4 million a month. Grant's face reddened. It was a cost-saving measure approved by the board. We needed to show immediate cash retention. It's not retention, it's strangulation, Cass said, turning back to the screen. I'm changing it. You can't change it, Grant snapped. Harrison gave you access to view and propose, not to alter the live operational codes. Then get me Harrison, Cass challenged. He's in meetings. He doesn't have time for the help. Grant sneered and walked away. Cass gritted her teeth. She was locked out of the simulation tools. She could analyze the problem, but she couldn't prove her solution worked without running the simulation. And Grant had just confirmed he wouldn't let her. She needed an ally, or at least a way around the firewall. She looked around the room. In the corner, near the server banks, sat a young guy in a hoodie, headphones on, ignoring the corporate madness. He was typing furiously. The IT guy. Cass stood up and walked over. She knew the type, overworked, underappreciated, and usually smarter than the suits running the place. "Hey," she said, leaning against his desk. The guy pulled off one earphone. "Ticket number?" "No ticket," Cass said. "I'm the waitress Harrison bet against." The guy's eyes widened. "The $50 million girl. Word travels fast. I'm Leo. You're insane, you know that. Harrison is going to eat you alive." "Probably," Cass admitted. "But right now, Grant Holloway has locked me out of the simulation sandbox because he knows I found his mistake. I need to run a what-if scenario on the Ohio corridor. Can you unlock me?" Leo looked at her, then at Grant, who was laughing with Victoria across the room. Leo smirked. "Grant once wrote me up for wearing sneakers on a Friday. What do you need?" "Root access to the Kensington sub-server." Leo typed a few commands. "You have 10 minutes before security protocols flag the intrusion. Make it count. You're a lifesaver, Leo." Cass rushed back to her desk. She had 10 minutes to input her new routing data and run the simulation. If she was right, the screen would turn green. If she was wrong, the simulation would crash, and she'd be escorted out by security. She input the variables, pay the tolls, shift the departure times by 2 hours to miss the steel traffic, increase driver rest time to reduce overtime pay. She hit enter. The progress bar crawled. 20%, 50%, 80%. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her desk. "I thought I told you to just write a proposal, not hack my mainframe." It was Harrison Sterling. He wasn't in a meeting. He had been watching her from his glass office on the mezzanine the entire time. Cass froze, her hand hovering over the mouse. The simulation was at 95%. "I needed to prove it," Cass said, standing up to face him. She wasn't going to be intimidated by his height or his glare. "Your CFO is hiding losses in the fuel budget. I'm fixing it." Harrison looked at the screen. The bar hit 100%. A massive green notification popped up. Projected savings, 14.2 million quarter. Efficiency increase, 22%. Harrison stared at the number. The room went silent again, as people noticed the CEO standing at the temp desk. Harrison looked from the screen to Cass. His expression was unreadable. "You found $14 million in 6 hours." "I found 20, Cass corrected him. "I haven't even touched the warehouse scheduling yet." For a second, a flicker of respect crossed Harrison's face, but he crushed it instantly. He couldn't let his employees see him impressed by an outsider so easily. "Beginner's luck," Harrison scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Finding the money is easy, Cassidy. Implementing it is the hard part. The union rep, Big Mike, is coming in tomorrow morning. He hates us. He's threatening a total strike if we change the routes again." Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Math is easy. People are hard. If you can't convince Big Mike to agree to these schedule changes by tomorrow noon, your little simulation is worthless, and you still lose the bet." Cass felt a knot in her stomach. She was a numbers person. She wasn't a negotiator, and Big Mike was known as the toughest union leader in Chicago. "I'll handle him," she lied. "We'll see," Harrison said. "Go home. Get some sleep. You look like..." He paused, looking at her cheap suit and tired eyes. You look like you need it. Tomorrow, the real test begins. He walked away, barking orders at Victoria. Cass sank into her chair. She had won the battle of the data, but the war was far from over. She had to convince a man who hated corporate suits to listen to a woman wearing a suit she bought at a thrift store. As she packed up her notes, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mum. Doctor says they need the down payment for the surgery by Friday, honey. Everything okay? Cass stared at the phone, tears pricking her eyes. It's going to be fine, Mom, she typed back. I'm working on a big tip. Wednesday morning dawned grey and oppressive, a typical Chicago gloom that seemed to weigh physically on the city. Cassidy arrived at the loading docks of Kensington Logistics' South Side hub at 7 a.m. Harrison had told her the meeting was at the headquarters, but Cass knew better. If you wanted to talk to Mike Kowalski, known universally as Big Mike, you didn't invite him to a glass office where he felt like a zoo animal. You went to his turf. She found him exactly where she expected, in the break room behind Bay 4, a room that smelled of stale coffee, diesel fumes, and grease. Big Mike was a mountain of a man, with forearms the size of tree trunks and a face weathered by 30 years of Midwest winters. He was sitting at a scarred folding table, surrounded by 3 other senior drivers who looked equally unimpressed by the arrival of a woman in a business suit. Harrison Sterling stood awkwardly by the vending machine in the corner, looking like a diamond in a coal mine. He wore a cashmere coat that probably cost more than the forklift parked outside. When he saw Cass enter, he checked his watch. "You're here," Harrison said, sounding surprised. "I told Mike to come to the office. He refused." "I know," Cass said quietly. She walked straight to the table. She didn't offer a handshake immediately. She knew that in this world, respect was earned, not given. "Who's this?" Mike grunted, not looking up from his newspaper. "Another one of your calculator kids, Sterling. We done talking." "I'm not a calculator kid," Cass said, her voice steady. "I'm the waitress who's going to save your overtime pay." Mike looked up then, his eyes narrowing. He looked her up and down, taking in the cheap suit and the determined set of her jaw. "Waitress, huh? You bring me coffee?" The other drivers snickered. Cass didn't flinch. She pulled a chair out and sat down, uninvited. "I brought you something better. I brought you a schedule that gets your guys home for dinner on Fridays." She slammed a printed spreadsheet onto the table. It wasn't the polished, color-coded presentation Grant Holloway would have used. It was raw data, marked up with red pen. "I looked at your logs, Mike," Cass started, leaning in. "Sterling's current plan has your guys running the red route through the back roads of Pennsylvania to avoid tolls. It adds 2 hours to the trip. You're paid by the mile, not the hour, so that's 2 hours of unpaid labor every single day. You're losing money, the company is burning fuel, and everyone is miserable." Mike picked up the paper, his thick fingers tracing the lines. "And the suits don't care. They just see the toll savings." "Exactly," Cass said. "But I'm changing it. We go back to the turnpike. We pay the tolls, but—" She held up a finger. "We shift the departure time from 6 Nos a.m. to 4 Nos a.m. 4 Nos a.m.? One of the other drivers barked. "You want us up in the middle of the night?" "I want you beating the steel traffic out of Youngstown," Cass countered sharply. "If you leave at 4, you clear the way station by 6:30. You cruise the rest of the way. You finish the run by 2 p.m. You beat the rush hour home. And because the efficiency goes up, I've calculated a bonus structure." She tapped the bottom of the page. "The money we save on fuel, half of it goes back to the drivers as a speed and safety bonus. That's an extra $400 a week per driver." Silence descended on the break room. The hum of the vending machine seemed incredibly loud. Harrison stepped forward, his eyes wide. He hadn't authorized a bonus. He opened his mouth to object, but Cass shot him a look that could have cut glass. "Trust me," her eyes said. Mike looked at the numbers. He did the math in his head. He looked at Harrison, then back at Cass. "You got the authority to promise this?" Mike asked, his voice low. "I have the authority to fix this merger," Cass lied confidently. "If this deal falls through on Friday, Mike, Sterling Heavy Industries dissolves Kensington. They sell the trucks for parts. You all lose your jobs. That's the reality. I'm offering you a way to keep the jobs and make more money. But I need you to sign off on the schedule change. Today." Mike leaned back, crossing his massive arms. He studied Cass for a long, agonizing minute. He wasn't looking at the spreadsheet anymore. He was looking at her hands. They were rough, waitress hands. Hands that had scrubbed tables and carried heavy trays. He recognized the work ethic. "You ain't no suit," Mike decided. He pulled a crumpled ballpoint pen from his pocket. "If the bonus isn't in the first paycheck, we strike, and we burn the tires in the lot." "Deal," Cass said. Mike signed the paper. Cass let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She stood up, her knees shaking slightly. "Thank you, Mike." As they walked out into the cold morning air, Harrison grabbed her arm. His grip was firm but not aggressive. There was a new energy in his eyes, confusion mixed with admiration. "You just gave away $2 million in bonuses," Harrison said. "And I saved you $12 million in fuel and lawsuits," Cass replied, pulling her arm away. "It's a net gain of $10 million, Harrison. Do the math." Harrison stared at her. The wind whipped his dark hair across his forehead. For the first time, he didn't look like the untouchable billionaire. He looked like a man who was realizing he had been wrong about everything. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "Really?" "I told you," Cass said, clutching her folder to her chest. "I'm just someone who pays attention." "My father built this company," Harrison said suddenly, looking out at the rows of trucks. "He started as a driver. He knew every bolt, every road. When he died, I took over. I went to Wharton. I hired the best MBAs. I thought—" He trailed off. "I thought data was the only truth. I forgot that the data represents people." It was a moment of vulnerability Cass hadn't expected. She saw the burden he carried. The $50 million wasn't just money to him. It was his legacy. It was proof that he was worthy of his father's empire. "Data is just a story told in numbers, Harrison," Cass said gently. "If you don't know the characters, you can't understand the plot." Harrison looked at her, really looked at her, for a long moment. The tension between them shifted. It wasn't just a boss and a temp anymore. It was two people standing on the edge of a precipice, realizing they might be the only ones who could save each other. "We have 24 hours left," Harrison said, buttoning his coat. "Let's go back to the office. I want to see this strategy of yours implemented." But as they got into the black town car, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the upper window of the warehouse office. Grant Holloway held a phone to his ear, his face twisted in a snarl. "She got Mike to sign," Grant whispered into the phone. "Yeah, I know. If she pulls this off, Harrison will audit the books. He'll see the embezzlement in the procurement fund. We can't let her finish, Victoria. Destroy the drive." The atmosphere in the war room on the 40th floor had shifted. When Cass walked in with Harrison, the snickering stopped. The analysts who had mocked her yesterday now watched her with wary curiosity. Word had spread that she had tamed Big Mike. Cass sat at her corner desk, energized. She had the union approval. She had the fuel data. Now, she just needed to compile the final presentation for the Friday morning board meeting. It was the master deck, a massive, complex simulation that integrated every variable. She worked through lunch and dinner. Harrison stayed late, pacing in his glass office, occasionally coming out to check her progress. He didn't hover. He brought her coffee. Real coffee, from his private machine. Not the break room sludge. "How does it look?" he asked around 10 p.m. The office was mostly empty, save for the cleaning crew and the security guard. "It's beautiful," Cass said, her eyes tired but shining. "The simulation is running at 98% efficiency. The EBITDA projection is up 18%. The investors are going to love this." "You did it," Harrison murmured. He was leaning against her desk, his sleeves rolled up. "I honestly didn't think you could." "You bet $50 million that I couldn't," Cass reminded him, with a tired smile. "Best money I ever lost," Harrison said. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something personal. His hand twitched toward hers on the desk. But he pulled back. "Go home, Cassidy. Get some sleep. The meeting is at 9 next a.m. Print the files, save the backup, and get out of here. You need to look fresh when you collect your check." "I just need to run the final render. It takes about an hour," Cass said. "I'll leave as soon as it's done. Good night, Cassidy." Harrison's voice was soft. He walked to the elevator, looking back once before the doors closed. Cass was alone. The hum of the building was soothing. She initiated the final render of the master deck. The progress bar started moving. She decided to use the restroom while it processed. She washed her face with cold water, staring at her reflection. She looked exhausted, but for the first time in years, she felt proud. She had proven herself. When she returned to the floor 10 minutes later, the lights over her desk were flickering. She frowned. She walked faster. As she rounded the corner, her heart stopped. Grant Holloway was standing at her desk. He was typing furiously. "What are you doing?" Cass screamed, sprinting across the room. Grant jumped, startled. He yanked a USB drive out of the computer tower. "Just checking your work, Waitress." Harrison wanted a second opinion. "Get away from my computer." Cass shoved him aside. She looked at the screen. The progress bar was gone. In its place was a terrifying command prompt window, scrolling red text. "Error. File corrupted. Directory empty." "No!" Cass gasped. She frantically clicked the mouse. "No! No! No!" The master deck was gone. The backups she had saved to the local drive. Gone. The raw data. Wiped. "Oops," Grant said, a cruel smirk plastering his face. "Looks like you overloaded the system. Typical amateur mistake. The system purges corrupt files automatically for security." "You deleted it," Cass whispered, horror washing over her. "You deleted everything." "Prove it," Grant sneered. He pocketed the USB drive. "The logs will show your user profile was logged in. You executed the delete command. I was just walking by." "Why?" Cass demanded, tears of rage springing to her eyes. "This hurts the company. This hurts Harrison." Grant stepped close, his voice a venomous hiss. "Harrison is a boy playing with toys his daddy left him. He doesn't know how the real world works. And you? You're a liability. You're digging into accounts you have no business seeing. If you think I'm going to let a waitress expose my procurement streams, you're crazier than he is." He straightened his tie. "You have nothing, Cassidy. No presentation. No data. Tomorrow morning, you walk into that boardroom empty-handed. Harrison will lose his $50 million. He'll be humiliated, and he'll blame you. You'll be the fraud he predicted." Grant turned and walked toward the elevator. "Don't bother calling IT. I sent Leo home hours ago, and I have administrative override on the security cameras for this sector. They're loop-playing an empty room right now." The elevator dinged. Grant stepped in. "Go back to serving steaks, honey. It's all you're good for." The doors closed. Cass sank into her chair. She tried to run a recovery program. Nothing. The drive had been formatted. She picked up her phone to call Harrison. Her thumb hovered over his name. What do I say? If she called him now, it would sound like a hysterical excuse. The dog ate my homework. Grant had set it up perfectly. Her login, her terminal. No cameras. Grant would deny everything, and Harrison, who was already skeptical, who had trusted her against his better judgment, would see this as incompetence. He would think she panicked and destroyed the files by accident, then tried to blame the CFO. She looked at the clock. 2:15 a.m. 7 hours until the meeting. She had lost. She packed her bag slowly. She didn't cry. She felt a cold numbness settling in. She walked out of the building, into the biting Chicago wind. She didn't go home. She walked the empty streets, feeling the weight of the city crushing her. At 5:00 a.m., Cass found herself sitting on a curb outside the Obsidian. The restaurant was closed, dark and silent. It was where this whole nightmare had started. She felt like a fool. She had let her guard down. She had trusted that doing a good job was enough. She had forgotten that in the corporate world, sharks didn't just swim. They hunted. She pulled her phone out. She had to text Harrison. She had to tell him not to expect her. She couldn't face the humiliation of walking into that boardroom and being destroyed publicly. As she typed the message, "I'm sorry. I failed." A cleaning van pulled up to the curb. It was the early morning trash pickup for the office buildings on the block. Cass watched idly as the workers tossed bags into the compactor. Then a thought struck her, a memory from her time in logistics. Redundancy. Sterling Heavy Industries used a legacy server system for their archives. Leo, the IT guy, had mentioned it. The old tape drives run a physical backup every night at 3:00 a.m. It's ancient tech, but it's air-gapped. Grant had wiped the digital servers. He had wiped the local drives. But the tape backup? That was a physical reel located in the basement server room, the graveyard, they called it. Grant was a suit. He thought in terms of clouds and codes. He probably didn't even know the tape drives existed. But did the tape backup catch her work before Grant wiped it? She had finished the work at 10 p.m. Grant wiped it at 2:00 a.m. The tape backup ran at 3:00 a.m. Wait, that meant the tape would have backed up the empty drive. Cass put her head in her hands. It was hopeless. Unless... She remembered something else Leo said. The system creates a shadow copy of every file deleted by a user, stored in a temp folder for 24 hours before the final purge. It's a fail-safe for idiots who delete the wrong thing. Grant had formatted the drive, but if he didn't do a secure wipe, which took hours, the shadow copies might still be deep in the server's cache. But she couldn't get back into the building. Her badge access was likely revoked or monitored by Grant. She needed Leo. She pulled up the employee directory she had downloaded to her phone on day 1. She found Leo's number. She dialed. "Hello?" A groggy voice answered. "Leo, it's Cass, the waitress." "Cass? It's 5 a.m. Are you crazy?" "Grant wiped the drive," Cass said, her voice urgent. "He destroyed the master deck. I have nothing for the meeting." Silence on the other end. Then the rustling of sheets. That slime ball. I knew he was up to something when he asked for the admin codes yesterday. "Leo, I need to get into the shadow volume. Can you do it remotely?" "Not if he severed the connection. I need physical access to the server room, but I can't get in. Security is tightest between 4:00 and 6 a.m. Cass looked at the back door of the Obsidian. The restaurant shared a loading alley with the Sterling building. There was a service corridor that connected the restaurant's basement to the building's steam tunnels. The kitchen staff used it to sneak out for smokes when it was raining. "Meet me in the alley behind the steakhouse," Cass said. "Bring your laptop. I know a back way in." 30 minutes later, Leo arrived, looking disheveled in a hoodie. Cass led him through the unlocked kitchen delivery door of the restaurant, she still had her key, down past the walk-in freezers, and to a heavy steel door marked "No Entry." "This leads to the Sterling boiler room," Cass whispered. "From there, it's one flight of stairs up to the server farm." They crept through the steam tunnels, the air hot and metallic. They dodged a patrolling guard by hiding behind a stack of crates. Finally, they reached the server room. It was freezing inside. Rows of blue lights blinked in the dark. Leo plugged his laptop into the main terminal. His fingers flew. "Okay, let's see what we have." Grant did a quick format. "Lazy, arrogant." "Can you restore it?" Cass asked, holding her breath. "I can find the fragments," Leo muttered, "but the file structure is gone. I can't give you the pretty PowerPoint. I can give you the raw data dump and the simulation logs." "That's enough," Cass said. "If the data is real, the truth will stand." "Wait," Leo said. "There's something else here." "What?" "When Grant logged in to do the wipe, he used his own admin credential to bypass the firewall, but he masked it as your user ID for the deletion command. But look at the timestamp metadata." Leo pointed to a string of code. "User, C. Miller. Spoofed. Origin MAC address. 001A2B. "That MAC address," Leo said, grinning. "That's not your computer. That matches the specific network card of the CFO's executive terminal." "We have his fingerprint," Cass realized. "We have the murder weapon," Leo corrected. "I'll dump this to a secure drive. But Cass, the meeting starts in 2 hours. You look like you crawled through a sewer." Cass looked down at her suit. It was smudged with grease from the tunnel. Her hair was a mess. "I don't care how I look," Cass said, her eyes hard. "I care about the truth. Let's go." The boardroom on the 50th floor was a sanctuary of wealth. The table was made of black marble. The view of Lake Michigan was breathtaking. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around the table. The investors and the board of directors. Harrison Sterling sat at the head, looking pale. He kept checking the door. It was 9:05 a.m. "She's not coming, Harrison," Grant Holloway said smoothly. He stood at the front of the room, looking fresh and confident. "I tried to warn you. You put your faith in a service worker. The pressure was too much for her. She likely realized her strategy was full of holes and ran away." One of the investors, a gray-haired man named Mr. Thorne, cleared his throat. "This is highly unprofessional, Harrison. You risked $50 million on a whim?" "It wasn't a whim," Harrison said, though his voice wavered. He felt a deep, sickening pit in his stomach. He had believed in her. He had felt a connection with her. Had it all been an act? Was he really that bad a judge of character? "We need to move on," Grant said. "I have prepared a contingency plan. It involves the layoffs we discussed and selling off the Eastern Warehouse division. It's painful, but it saves the merger." Grant clicked a remote. A slide appeared on the screen. "Strategic downsizing." "Wait," Harrison said. "We can't wait," Grant insisted. "The market opens in 20 minutes. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom banged open. Everyone turned. Cassidy Miller stood there. She looked rough. Her suit was dirty. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she had dark circles under her eyes. But she held a laptop under one arm like a shield. Leo stood behind her, looking terrified. "I apologize for my appearance," Cass said, her voice ringing clear and strong. "I had some technical difficulties. Or rather, someone tried to ensure I did." "Security!" Grant shouted. "Get this woman out of here! She's trespassing!" "Sit down, Grant!" Harrison roared. He stood up, his eyes locking onto Cass. Let her speak. Cass walked to the front of the room. She didn't look at the investors, she looked at Harrison. I don't have the pretty slides, she said. I don't have the animations, but I have the truth. She plugged Leo's laptop into the HDMI cable. The screen flickered, replacing Grant's polished slide with a wall of raw code and numbers. This, Cass gestured to the screen, is the recovered log of the Kensington simulation. As you can see, the efficiency rating is 98%. By shifting the schedules and paying the tolls, we save $14 million per quarter. This is gibberish, Grant yelled. She typed that up in a notepad. And this, Cass continued, clicking a key, is the security log from the server room at 2:30 a.m. this morning. A new window popped up. It showed the code Leo had found. Origin MAC address, CFO office, term 1. This shows that the command to delete my presentation originated from Grant Holloway's computer, Cass said calmly. It also shows that for the past 3 years, Grant has been routing fuel surcharge fees into a shell company in the Cayman Islands. That's why he wanted to cut the driver count, to hide the fact that the fuel budget was inflated by 15% to cover his theft. The room went deadly silent. Grant's face drained of color. That's a lie. She's hacking the system. Is she? Harrison asked. His voice was ice cold. He looked at Grant. Because that MAC address matches the one on the invoices you send me every month. Harrison turned to the board. Mr. Thorne, you're on the audit committee. Does this look like a hack to you? Mr. Thorne adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen. No. That looks like a forensic trail, a very damning one. Harrison walked over to Grant. He was inches from his face. You tried to sabotage my company. You tried to ruin this woman's life, and you bet against me. Harrison, please, Grant stammered. I did it for the stock price. You're fired, Harrison said. Security. Escort Mr. Holloway to the police station. I believe we have charges to file for corporate espionage and embezzlement. 2 guards grabbed Grant, who was now trembling, and dragged him out. His protests echoed down the hall. Harrison turned back to Cass. The room was silent, waiting. And as for the merger strategy, Harrison asked. Cass tapped a key. The final number displayed on the screen. Net profit increase. $52 million. It works, she said simply. The drivers are on board. The routes are optimized. You save the deal. Mr. Thorne stood up slowly. He began to clap. Then the woman next to him. Soon the entire board was applauding. Harrison didn't clap. He walked up to Cass. He ignored the dirt on her suit. He ignored the board members watching. You won, he said softly. I did, Cass whispered, her adrenaline finally crashing. She swayed slightly. Harrison caught her arm to steady her. You okay? I'm tired, Harrison. I'm really tired. I know, he said. He turned to the board. Meeting adjourned. The strategy is approved. We sign the merger. Friday evening arrived with a crisp, electric energy that seemed to hum through the streets of Chicago. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the world into a kaleidoscope of gold and neon. For Cassidy Miller, however, the world looked entirely different than it had just 72 hours ago. She stood in front of the heavy oak doors of the Obsidian. 3 days ago, she would have been scurrying around the back, dodging dumpsters to slip into the kitchen entrance, hoping Arthur wouldn't dock her pay for being 2 minutes late. Tonight, she walked up the red carpet of the main entrance. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk, a garment that moved like water against her skin. It had been delivered to her apartment that morning in a long white box with a simple note, for the victory lap. Cassidy took a deep breath, clutching a small beaded purse, and pushed the doors open. The maitre de station was bustling. When Arthur, the floor manager, bustled over, he stopped dead in his tracks. His face, usually flushed with the exertion of yelling at kitchen staff, drained of color. He looked at Cassidy, then at the dining room, then back at Cassidy. He seemed to be physically shrinking. "Cassidy?" Arthur squeaked. "I mean, Ms. Miller?" Cassidy looked at him. She remembered the way he had snapped at her when her mother was in the hospital, how he had treated her like a replaceable cog. She could have been cruel. Instead, she offered him a small, pitying smile. "Hello, Arthur," she said calmly. "I believe I'm expected at table 4. "Yes," Arthur swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yes, of course. Mr. Sterling has been waiting for 20 minutes. He refused to order until you arrived." Arthur led her through the dining room. The walk felt like a dream. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the smell of truffle and searing meat. It was all familiar, yet completely alien. She felt the eyes of the wealthy patrons on her, wondering who the stunning woman in blue was. They reached table 4, the best table in the house. Harrison Sterling rose immediately. He had traded his aggressive boardroom power suit for a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, though he had forgone the tie, leaving the top button of his shirt undone. It made him look younger, less like a titan of industry, and more like a man who had finally exhaled. "You came," Harrison said, his voice low and warm. "I almost didn't recognize the front door," Cassidy joked, though her voice trembled slightly. "The view is different from this side of the apron." Harrison pulled out her chair, a gesture he had certainly never performed when she was pouring his wine. "You look incredible, Cassidy. Truly." The table was set for a celebration. A bottle of Dom Perignon sat in a silver bucket, but in the center of the table was a single, thin envelope. Harrison sat across from her. "The board is still in shock," he said, breaking the silence. "After you left, we audited Grant's department. The forensic accountants found everything. The shell companies, the kickbacks. He's going to prison for a long time. Victoria and half the procurement team were complicit." "I'm glad," Cassidy said softly. "The company deserves better." "The drivers got their bonuses today," Harrison added. "Big Mike called me. He actually thanked me. I think that's the first time a union rep has ever spoken to me without shouting." He reached out and tapped the envelope. "But we have unfinished business." Cassidy felt her heart hammer. She took the envelope. Her fingers shook as she opened the flap. Inside was a cashier's check. Pay to the order of Cassidy Miller. Amount $1,000. She stared at the zeros. $1 million. To Harrison, this was a wager. To Cassidy, it was life itself. She saw the surgery her mother desperately needed. She saw the debts disappearing. She saw the weight that had been crushing her chest for 2 years finally lifting. Tears welled in her eyes. "Harrison," she whispered, "you have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Harrison said gently. "I had HR look into your file. I know about your mother. I know why you left grad school." He leaned forward. "But that check? That's just the payment for services rendered. That closes the bet. But it doesn't solve my problem." Cassidy looked up, wiping a tear away. "What problem?" "The problem is that I'm alone at the top," Harrison admitted, his voice raw. "Grant was right about one thing. I was playing with toys my father left me. I need someone who sees what I miss, someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." He slid a rectangular object across the table. It was a security badge, black and gold. Name, Cassidy Miller. Title, Chief Operations Officer. Cassidy gasped. "Kuo, Harrison, I haven't even finished my degree." "The board already loves you," Harrison countered. "Mr. Thorne asked if I had hired you yet before the meeting even ended. They don't care about the degree, Cassidy. They care about results. And you have the best results I've ever seen." "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Harrison said. "Come work with me." "Not for me." "With me." Cassidy looked at the badge, then at Harrison. For the first time, she saw the man behind the billionaire. He was lonely, and he was looking at her as his equal. She picked up the badge. "I have conditions." "Name them." "We keep the driver bonuses permanent. We implement a tuition reimbursement program for the warehouse staff. And Arthur treats the staff with respect, or I fire him on Monday." Harrison laughed, a loud, joyous sound. "Done, done, and absolutely done." He poured the champagne. "Also," he said, his voice dropping, "there's a personal condition. I realized something over the last 48 hours. When I won, the only person I wanted to celebrate with was you. I don't want to have dinner alone anymore, Cassidy." A blush crept up Cassidy's neck. She smiled, raising her glass. "Well, since you're paying, I can join you." Just then, a shadow fell over the table. A young waitress, no older than 20, stood there. Her hands were shaking so badly that the water pitcher she was holding clattered against the glasses. She was terrified, serving the owner's VIP client. "I'm so sorry," the girl stammered. "Water for the table?" Cassidy saw herself in the girl, the fear, the exhaustion. She looked at Harrison, waiting. Harrison looked up at the young waitress. He smiled, a genuine, kind smile. "Thank you," Harrison said softly. "What is your name?" "Sarah, sir," the girl whispered. "Well, Sarah, take your time," Harrison said. "We're in no rush, and make sure you add a 20% service charge to the bill for yourself, on top of the tip." The girl's jaw dropped. "Thank you, sir." She scurried away, beaming. Harrison turned back to Cassidy to find her looking at him with a soft expression. "You really are a quick learner," Cassidy said. "I had a good teacher," Harrison replied. He clinked his glass against hers. Outside, the Chicago wind howled, but inside the Obsidian, everything was warm. Cassidy Miller had walked in looking for a paycheck, but she was leaving with a career, a future, and perhaps something even more valuable. The game had changed, and she was finally holding the winning hand. Cassidy Miller went from serving tables to running an empire, proving that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. She didn't just save a company, she taught a CEO that the most valuable asset isn't data, it's the people behind the numbers. Harrison learned that true power comes from humility, and that sometimes the biggest gamble yields the greatest reward, a partner who challenges you to be better. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and corporate revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe for more dramatic stories like this one. What would you do if you were in Cassidy's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.